Ruby March put a shovel in the dirt to find her husband. What she found instead was someone else's body and a gun with 6 notches carved in the grip. Ruby March squinted at the endless horizon, the setting sun painting the desert in fiery hues. Dust devils danced across the cracked earth, mirroring the restless unease in her heart. 5 years. 5 years since the telegram arrived, informing her that Jade, her husband, had fallen in battle, but Ruby never truly believed it. Jade was too clever, too resourceful to simply vanish in some faraway war. She lived a simple life on their isolated ranch, tending to a small herd of cattle and a meager vegetable garden. The work was hard, but it kept her mind occupied, or at least partially occupied. Memories of Jade flickered like candlelight in the wind, his easy smile, the way he'd hum off-key while fixing the roof, the secrets that sometimes clouded his eyes. Jade had been a complicated man, a charmer with a hidden darkness. Before the war, he'd spent weeks away on business trips, claiming to be buying and selling horses. Ruby never pressed him for details, but she always sensed there was more to it than he let on. One memory surfaced, Jade burying something beneath the old oak tree near the creek. He'd been secretive, his eyes darting around nervously. When she asked what he was doing, he simply said, planting a surprise. A surprise that never bloomed. Now the weight of her suspicions had become unbearable. Tonight she would finally know the truth. Tonight she would dig up Jade's grave. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, offered little light as Ruby made her way to the cemetery. It was a small, neglected plot on the outskirts of town, where the dust devils roamed free, and the wind whispered secrets through the gnarled branches of the mesquite trees. Jade's grave was marked by a simple wooden cross, his name and dates crudely carved into the weathered wood. Ruby knelt, the cool earth seeping through her worn trousers. Her hands trembled as she gripped the shovel, the metal cold against her skin. Each scoop of dirt felt like a betrayal, a desecration of the love she once shared with Jade, even if that love was built on secrets. The digging was harder than she expected. The ground was dry and compacted, resisting her efforts. Sweat trickled down her brow, blurring her vision. Finally, the shovel struck something solid, the wooden lid of the coffin. A wave of nausea washed over her. This was it, the moment of truth. With renewed determination, she pried open the coffin, the hinges groaning in protest. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. Ruby held her breath and peered inside. The sight that greeted her made her gasp. Inside the coffin lay not the tall, broad-shouldered frame of Jade March, but a collection of smaller, more delicate bones. Alongside the skeleton rested a heavy burlap sack, its contents glinting gold even in the dim moonlight. And nestled beside it, a military pistol, its handle worn smooth with age, but clearly not the standard-issue weapon used by soldiers in Jade's unit. Ruby's mind raced. This wasn't Jade, but who was it? And what were the gold and the pistol doing in his coffin? A cold dread settled in her stomach. Jade had lied about everything. She carefully lifted the sack. The gold coins clinked softly, a seductive whisper in the stillness of the night. She recognized some of the markings, foreign currency, likely stolen. The pistol felt heavy and cold in her hand, a tangible link to a past she didn't understand. She quickly reburied the coffin, covering her tracks as best she could. Back at the ranch, she hid the gold and the pistol beneath a loose floorboard in the main room, her heart pounding in her chest. She had stumbled upon something dangerous, something that reached far beyond Jade's supposed death. Unbeknownst to Ruby, a pair of eyes had watched her leave the cemetery, the glint of greed shining in the darkness. The news would spread quickly. Ruby March had robbed a grave, and everyone wanted to know what she found. The following morning, Ruby tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, tending to her chores as usual. But the weight of her secret pressed down on her, a constant reminder of the deception she had uncovered. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of fear through her. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone came looking, and they did. Word of the grave robbery had reached the town of Dust Creek faster than a prairie fire. The townsfolk, a mix of honest ranchers and shady characters, whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting towards Ruby whenever she ventured into town for supplies. At the general store, old Maggie, the owner, gave her a knowing look. "Heard you were out late last night, Ruby," she said, her voice laced with suspicion. "Anything you want to share?" Ruby forced a smile. "Just paying my respects, Maggie, it's been a while." But Maggie's eyes didn't waver. Back at the ranch, Ruby found a fresh set of wagon tracks leading up to her property. Someone had been there, snooping around. Her paranoia intensified. She grabbed Jade's old rifle, its weight comforting in her hands. She wasn't sure who was coming or what they wanted, but she knew she had to be ready. The truth about Jade was out there, and she was determined to find it, no matter the cost. The rider appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a lone figure against the harsh landscape. As he drew closer, Ruby recognized the cold, calculating eyes of Silas, a bounty hunter with a reputation as ruthless as the desert itself. He dismounted in front of her ranch, his gaze sweeping over the property with predatory interest. "Mrs. March," he drawled, his voice like gravel, "heard you've been doing some gardening, late at night." Ruby stood her ground, the rifle hidden behind her back. "I don't know what you're talking about." Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Don't play coy with me, Mrs. March. Everyone knows you dug up your husband. And everyone knows there was more in that coffin than just bones." He stepped closer, his eyes glinting. "Your husband was a wanted man, Ruby, and where there's a wanted man, there's usually money involved." He circled her like a wolf sizing up its prey. "I'm looking for Jade, and I have a feeling you know where he is." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Cooperate and things will go easy on you. Resist and—" He shrugged, his meaning clear. Ruby knew this was just the beginning. Silas wouldn't leave until he got what he wanted, and she had a feeling what he wanted wasn't just gold. Just when Ruby thought things couldn't get any worse, another figure emerged from the shadows, Jebediah Pike. Pike was a snake of a man, with a greasy smile and eyes that never quite met yours. He and Jade had been rivals for years, competing for land, for business, and even briefly for Ruby's affections. She hadn't seen him since Jade left for the war. Pike approached with a swagger, his gaze lingering on Silas before turning to Ruby. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Looks like you've got company, Ruby. Trouble seems to follow you these days." "What do you want, Pike?" Ruby asked, her hand tightening on the rifle. "Just came to offer my condolences," he said, his smile widening. "And maybe offer a little help. I know Jade better than most. We had business dealings back in the day, and I know he wasn't always the most honest man." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Heard you found something interesting in his grave, something that belongs to me perhaps," he chuckled. "Let's just say Jade and I had a little disagreement about some gold a long time ago, a disagreement he never quite settled." He looked pointedly at Silas, then back at Ruby. "I can protect you from vultures like him, Ruby. All you have to do is tell me where it is." Ruby knew that trusting Pike would be like making a deal with the devil, but with Silas breathing down her neck, she wasn't sure she had a choice. Knowing she couldn't trust either Silas or Pike, Ruby decided to take matters into her own hands. She ventured back into Dust Creek, this time with a purpose. She started subtly asking questions about Jade, carefully choosing her targets. Old Man Withers, the town drunk, remembered Jade owing a considerable sum to a group of card sharks before he left for the war. "Lost more than he could afford, that boy," Withers mumbled, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Said he had a way to pay it back, though, something big." At the saloon, the bartender, a burly man named Hank, recalled Jade making frequent trips to a nearby mining town, known for its illicit activities. "Said he was buying supplies," Hank said, wiping down the counter. "But I always figured he was doing something else. Jade always had a way of getting himself into trouble." The pieces were starting to fit together, painting a picture of Jade far different from the loving husband she thought she knew. Gambling debts, shady deals, trips to a lawless mining town, it all pointed to a man living on the edge, desperate for money and willing to do whatever it took to get it. The truth was ugly, but Ruby knew she had to face it if she ever wanted to be free of Jade's past. But as she gathered these fragments, she felt eyes on her, watching her every move. Silas and Pike were never far behind. As Ruby left the saloon, Silas stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. "Getting chatty, aren't we, Mrs. March?" he sneered, grabbing her arm. "I don't like being kept waiting." "I told you I don't know anything," Ruby said, trying to pull away. Silas's grip tightened. "Liar, you know where Jade is and you know where the money is. Now are you going to tell me, or do I have to get rough?" He shoved her against the wall of the saloon, his face inches from hers. "I'm not a patient man, Ruby." Suddenly a commotion erupted down the street, a fight breaking out in front of the general store. Silas hesitated, distracted by the noise. Ruby seized the opportunity. She kicked him in the shin hard and wrenched herself free. She ran, dodging startled townsfolk, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of town, sprinting towards her horse. Silas was fast, she could hear him gaining on her. She jumped onto her horse and spurred it into a gallop, leaving Dust Creek in a cloud of dust. She glanced back, seeing Silas silhouetted against the setting sun, his face contorted with rage. She knew then that this was more than just about money. Silas wanted Jade, and he wouldn't stop until he found him or until he found her. She was in grave danger. Ruby didn't head back to her ranch. It was too obvious a place to go. Instead, she took a winding route through the canyons, trying to lose anyone who might be following her. Just as darkness began to fall, Pike appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, blocking her path. "Whoa there, Ruby," he said, holding up his hands. "No need to be afraid. I saw what happened in town. Silas is a dangerous man, but I can protect you." "Why would you do that, Pike?" Ruby asked, her hand resting on the handle of her pistol. "Because I care about you, Ruby," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "And because that gold belongs to me, or at least it should. Jade cheated me out of it years ago. I just want what's rightfully mine." He stepped closer. "I can offer you protection, a place to hide. All I ask is that you share the gold with me. We can split it 50-50. It's a fair deal." Ruby didn't believe a word he said. Pike had never cared about anyone but himself. His offer of protection was just a ploy to get his hands on the gold, but she was running out of options. "And what happens after we split the gold, Pike?" she asked. "Will you just leave me alone?" Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see," he said, his tone noncommittal. Ruby knew she couldn't trust him, but for now he might be her only chance. Ruby reluctantly agreed to travel with Pike for the night, but she remained wary, never letting her guard down. They camped in a secluded canyon, a fire casting flickering shadows on the rock walls. While Pike slept, Ruby slipped away and returned to her ranch. She knew it was risky, but she had to find something, anything, that could give her an edge. She searched Jade's belongings, sifting through old letters, clothes, and trinkets. Nothing. Just as she was about to give up, she noticed Jade's old saddle, the one he used on his business trips. She ran her hands over the worn leather, feeling for anything unusual. Finally, she found it, a small, almost imperceptible seam. She carefully cut open the seam, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, she found a folded piece of parchment, a map. Her heart leaped. The map depicted a series of landmarks leading to a location deep in the mountains. Scrawled across the bottom were the words, "Army Payroll Cache." Ruby's blood ran cold. Jade hadn't been buying horses. He'd been stealing from the army. And the gold in the grave, it was just a fraction of what he had hidden away. Now everyone would be after the stolen money, and she was the only one who knew where it was. The stakes had just been raised. She had to get to that cache before Silas or Pike did. Under the cover of darkness, Ruby followed the map, leading her deep into the rugged mountains. The terrain was treacherous, the air thin and cold. She arrived at the designated location, a hidden cave behind a waterfall, just as dawn broke. But she wasn't alone. Silas and Pike were already there waiting for her. They had tracked her, anticipating her next move. "Well, well, Mrs. March," Silas said, a cruel smile on his face. "Looks like you led us right to the prize." "The game's over, Ruby," Pike added, his gun drawn. "Just tell us where the money is and no one has to get hurt." Ruby stood her ground, her own pistol drawn. "I know what you both want," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not going to let you have it. This money belongs to the army. It should be returned." Silas laughed. "Sentimental to the end, aren't you, Ruby? Too bad sentiment won't buy you a bulletproof vest." He and Pike exchanged glances, each sizing up the other, knowing that only one of them would walk away with the stolen payroll. The air crackled with tension. A showdown was inevitable. Ruby knew she had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than both of them if she wanted to survive. "You think I just blindly followed this map?" Ruby said, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I knew you'd be coming. I set a trap." She gestured towards the entrance of the cave. "Enjoy your visit." Suddenly, the ground beneath Silas and Pike's feet gave way, sending them tumbling into a pit filled with sharpened stakes. They cried out in surprise and pain, scrambling to get out. As they struggled, Ruby fired a shot into the air, triggering a series of hidden explosives she had rigged throughout the cave. The cave erupted in chaos. Rocks rained down from the ceiling, dust filled the air, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the mountains. Silas and Pike, wounded and disoriented, returned fire, bullets whizzing past Ruby's head. She ducked behind a large boulder, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The gunfight was intense and brutal. Silas, despite his injuries, was a skilled marksman, but Ruby was fighting for her life. Pike, weakened and desperate, was more of a liability than an asset to Silas. The cave became a deadly maze, filled with hidden dangers and desperate men. Ruby knew she couldn't stay there forever. She had to find a way to escape and to bring Silas and Pike to justice. This was far from over. During a lull in the gunfire, as both Silas and Ruby reloaded, Pike, bleeding and desperate, shouted, "It's all Jade's fault. He planned it all." Ruby stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "He faked his death," Pike yelled, his voice cracking. "He stole that army payroll and planned to disappear. He needed to escape his debts, and he saw the war as his way out." "That's not true," Ruby said, but a seed of doubt had been planted. "It is," Pike insisted. "He told me everything. He was going to come back for you, Ruby, once things cooled down. He swore he loved you, but something went wrong. He double-crossed the wrong people." He coughed, blood splattering on his shirt. "He thought he could outsmart everyone, but he was a fool." Silas, hearing this, turned his gun on Pike. "Shut your mouth, old man, you've said too much." Before Silas could fire, Ruby shot him in the arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. The revelation had stunned her, but she couldn't let it distract her. Jade had lied to her, betrayed her, but she couldn't let Pike and Silas get away with it. The truth was out, and now she had to decide what to do with it. Her whole world had been a lie. Silas, enraged by Pike's outburst, managed to overpower him, a brutal struggle ending with a gunshot. Pike slumped to the ground, dead. Ruby, watching in horror, knew she had to act fast. Silas was still a threat, and now he was even more determined to get his hands on the money. As Silas advanced on her, Ruby noticed a piece of paper sticking out of Pike's pocket. She grabbed it, narrowly dodging a bullet. It was a letter addressed to Pike, written in Jade's handwriting. With trembling hands, Ruby read the letter. It detailed Jade's plan to fake his death and steal the army payroll, just as Pike had said. But it also revealed a shocking truth. Pike was supposed to help Jade disappear, but instead he murdered him, intending to keep the money for himself. "You killed him," Ruby said, her voice barely a whisper. Silas stopped, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "This letter," Ruby said, holding it up. It says Pike killed Jade, he betrayed him, he stole his money. Silas hesitated, then lunged at Ruby, trying to grab the letter. But Ruby was ready. She fired a shot, hitting Silas in the chest. He staggered backward, collapsing to the ground. With his dying breath, he cursed Ruby's name. Ruby stood there, panting, the letter clutched in her hand. Jade had betrayed her, but Pike had murdered him. The truth was finally out, and it was more twisted and tragic than she could have ever imagined. With Silas and Pike dead, Ruby was left with a difficult decision. She could keep the stolen army payroll and start a new life, far away from Dust Creek and Jade's past. But that wasn't the kind of person she was. She knew what Jade should have done. She gathered the money and returned it to the army, explaining everything that had happened. The army officials were grateful, impressed by her honesty and courage. They allowed her to keep the bag of gold she had found in Jade's grave as a reward for her efforts. Ruby returned to Dust Creek, a changed woman. She used the gold to rebuild her ranch, making it a thriving and prosperous place. She also helped the town, investing in new businesses and creating jobs. The townsfolk, once suspicious of her, now respected her. She finally accepted Jade's death, understanding that the man she had loved was not the man she thought he was. She exhumed the bones from Jade's fake grave and, with the help of the town's preacher, gave them a proper burial next to the empty coffin. She also found where Pike had buried Jade, in a shallow, unmarked grave. She brought his body back to Dust Creek and buried him next to the empty coffin, next to the fake one. She placed a simple wooden cross over the grave, finally laying Jade to rest. She had found justice and a measure of peace. The ghosts of her past were finally quiet. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Ruby stood on the porch of her rebuilt ranch house, gazing out at the vast expanse of the western landscape. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of a new beginning. The ranch was thriving. The cattle were healthy, the crops were plentiful, and the air was filled with the sounds of life. She had hired new hands, giving people in Dust Creek a chance to earn an honest living. The town was prospering, thanks to her investment and her unwavering belief in its potential. The scars of the past were still there, etched on her face and in her heart. But they were a reminder of her strength, her resilience, and her ability to overcome adversity. She had faced betrayal, violence, and loss, but she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever before. She looked down at her hands, calloused and weathered but capable. They had dug up secrets, fired guns, and built a new life. They were the hands of a survivor. A faint smile touched her lips. The West had tested her, pushed her to her limits, but she had survived. She had found justice, closure, and a measure of peace. And as she looked out at the endless horizon, she knew that her journey was far from over. The West was a land of endless possibilities, and she was ready to embrace them. Ruby March was finally home.